Welcome back to the channel and to the shop. This week I am back to work on the K&T horizontal mill. As you can see here, hopefully you can see here from this video, that the inside of the gearbox is nice and clean. I flushed this out with a lot of K1 kerosene and then wiped out what I could get to by hand. I also removed the pickup for the oil pump. There was some gunk in there, although it was fairly clean, but I got the rest of it out. And the first thing I need to do to put this thing back together is make sure that's installed correctly. When I took it apart, there was no obvious signs of a thread sealant or anything like that. So with an NPT thread, you just need to get it tight and it should make a good seal. And this needs to have a good seal, otherwise I could end up cavitating the oil pump, which would deprive the rest of the machine of oil. This little bracket was on this pipe before. I'm not sure really what purpose it serves other than to reinforce the threaded joint. The next thing I want to do is get the gearbox reinstalled. But before I do, I want to make sure that the mating surfaces on the back of the gearbox cover as well as the column are good and clean. Just like I did with the coolant pump, I'm going to use some Permatex High-Tech as a sealant on the mating surfaces between the gearbox cover and the column. This didn't have any kind of a gasket on it originally. I'm not sure what they would have used at the factory, but I've seen others use Permatex in this way, so I figured it would be a good idea to try to minimize any chances of oil leaks here. To help me guide this gearbox back on, I'm going to try using these 4 threaded rods again. Honestly, I'm not expecting them to work as well as I would like them to. I did skim a little bit off of the diameter, hoping that would give them a little bit more room, but I don't think that they're straight enough. I think there's too many kinks and bends in them that they're just not going to work right. I've had the gearbox sitting on this utility cart since I've taken it out of the machine. Luckily, the gearbox looks like it's in great shape. I didn't see any obvious signs of any problems. I did flush the bearings out with some kerosene and then used some generic spindle oil on them just to pre-lubricate them. I finagled the engine hoist into a position that should make it easy for me to lift this thing, but before I can, I need to reinstall my makeshift handle into a couple of the mounting holes. Then I can thread in this lifting strap that I have doubled over and use a D-ring or a clevis to attach it to the hook on the engine hoist. With the majority of the weight being taken up by the engine hoist, I can remove the ratchet strap that I had around the gearbox and the utility cart that I put on there just as a little bit of insurance that some ghost wouldn't knock it over in the middle of the night. I got the gearbox lifted up high enough that I could get rid of the cart. Of course, as soon as I did that, it caused the gearbox to spin around 180 degrees, making the insertion of this into the column that much more interesting. So now it's a matter of guiding this in, trying to get it onto those guide rods, and especially trying to get that clutch shaft through the appropriate hole on the other side of the column. This thing does have some considerable weight to it. I guessed before that it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 175 pounds. So it's definitely not light, and trying to lift it to get it onto these guide rods is proving to be quite the challenge. Well, as predicted, these guide rods are becoming more of a hindrance than a help. So I will remove the bottom two at least and see if that makes it a little bit easier. Rather than trying to line up 4 rods on 4 holes, maybe just the top 2 will be enough to help me get this in there. Well, it's in far enough now that the 2 remaining rods are maintaining the weight, but I can't put it in any further until I remove the lifting handle from those 2 mounting locations. With the engine hoist now releasing all of the weight, I can take this little handle off, and I should be able to slide this the rest of the way in. I do need to make sure that the shifting forks are aligned with the sliding gears that they manipulate that are inside the column. Well, 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I need to pull this out a little bit because when I removed the handle, which had 4 nuts on it, 2 nuts on each side, I looked over at the mill table and I only saw 3 nuts. So one of them's missing somewhere, and I'm not sure if it's dropped on the floor underneath the mill or if it's down inside the gearbox. I have no choice but to stop everything that I'm doing and find that 4th nut. If it's anywhere inside this gearbox, I will end up ruining this machine and wasting every bit of work that I put into it as soon as I turn it on for the first time. Well, unfortunately, it did fall down inside the gearbox, but the good news is I was able to find it and retrieve it. Well, with that disaster averted, now I can get back to installing this gearbox back into the column. Well, with the gearbox almost all the way in, I think I can take advantage of those lower guide rods now. Since I won't be needing to slide this gearbox along their entire length, having one in the bottom may help me get this lined up and stationary. With all the gears and shift forks lined up, I can now slide this on all the way and begin fastening it down with the screws. I decided to close the overhead door. The light from outside was wreaking havoc on the camera, as you probably noticed. Plus, it will hopefully eliminate some of the noise coming in from outside. before I get the rest of the drivetrain installed, I want to get the door installed. I made new bolts for the hinges from some hex stock that I happen to have. Once that big pulley and the bottom pulley are installed, the bolts to the hinges are very difficult to get to, as I found when I was disassembling it. Before I go to install the power feed and rapid traverse takeoff bracket, I want to do what I did with the gearbox cover, and that is all the mating surfaces give it a light coat of Permatex. I have no idea if this was done at the factory or they just merely relied on the machine surfaces to seal up these areas, or even if a true seal is even necessary. But I don't think that this would be a problem. I certainly hope it's not, because I don't want to take this off again. But if it does become a problem, it really isn't that hard to take off this bracket and clean it up and put it back together. With a slight coating of Permatex, I can bring in the power feed and rapid traverse takeoff bracket and muscle this into place to be reinstalled. Part of the trick here is to get these bevel gears that slide on the power feed and rapid traverse shafts meshed with the accompanying gears that are in the drive bracket itself.
Where's the pins?
Once those drive gears are in place, I can lift this larger bracket into place and seat it on the dowel pins. Once it's in position, I can insert and screw down all these Philister head screws, as well as the socket head cap screws that attach it to the column. Just as before, prior to inserting the drive pulley, I want to put some Permatex on these machine mating surfaces. The oil pump for the machine is contained within this takeoff bracket, and it does feed into parts of the drive pulley. And I do want to make sure that all of those passages are sealed and that the oil pump is operating as it should. And again, like before, I have no idea if this is what they might have done at the factory. I do know that there is a former K&T employee who I've reached out to from time to time who's rebuilt these machines, but I don't want to bug him every 5 minutes. So some of this I'm just going to try to use a little bit of experience and a little bit of what I've gleaned from other YouTubers as to whether or not this is going to be a beneficial thing or not. Like many parts of this disassembly and reassembly, I did not take everything down to the last bolt. One of those examples here is the drive pulley. I left the pulley bracket and the drive gears attached. So once I place it into the drive bracket, I just need to get the gears on the back of this to mesh with the gear train, and then line up the bolt holes on the pulley bracket with those that are in the power feed takeoff bracket. And with those holes lined up, I'll use the hex head screws to refasten the pulley bracket to the power feed and rapid traverse takeoff bracket. Next thing I can reinstall is the power feed rapid traverse drive bracket cover. I thought about using Permatex on the mating surfaces here as well. I believe this might be lubricated from within the knee. I'm not 100% sure on that, but if I do see any seepage coming through here, and if I feel it's necessary, it's not that hard to take back off. And next up with the drive bracket is these oil retaining plates. These slide up and down on the shaft and have a couple of bushings on them. And there are 4 Philister head screws that attach them to the underside of the drive bracket and the drive bracket cover. Again, on here, I thought about using the Permatex, but I opted not to do that here as well. I can now turn my attention to the drive pulley and start getting the clutch reassembled, starting with this clutch gear ring. This is held on to the main drive pulley with some hex head screws and washers. I can now place the friction disc into the inner gear ring. There are 6 springs, pressure springs, that get seated over top of these dowel pins on the driven side of the clutch. Now I can put on what I'm calling the pressure plate. There are 6 accompanying bores on the back of this that line up with each of those springs. While I hold that in place, I can start threading on what I'm going to call a clutch spider. It's threaded onto the part of the drive pulley, and these little fingers that are hinged sit on the pressure plate. Before I can thread this on too far, I need to insert this clutch dome. This fits inside of the fingers on that clutch spider. I'll adjust this clutch later, but for now I'm going to just install the castle nut and the cotter pin that holds this in place. You can do a quick test here. You can see how the drive pulley spins freely, and then once I engage the clutch, how it links the drive pulley and the input shaft together. I'll adjust this later once it's fully under power. Well, that's it for this video. I do appreciate you watching. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help with the Google, YouTube analytics. Don't forget to leave a comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.